What's up, guys? Welcome to the GamerMD83 podcast. I'm MD, and this is Nick.
This is Nick.
As always.
As always.
Today, we're going to talk about death in video games.
Because that's what everyone wants to talk about.
I know it sounds very, very grim.
This should have been our Halloween episode, but timing being timing.
Yeah, but, I think the interesting thing that we wanted to cover in this topic was how games can take something so grim and sad and affecting, like death, and basically make it into a way or a means of moving forward in a video game. Like, this is why you keep moving forward, this is why you keep trying, because death occurs a lot in video games in so many different ways. And it means different things to a lot of gamers, but it rarely ever is, when it happens to the player, it's not like, every time you die, you start crying and like, oh my God, my character just died. It's more of a means of letting you know what you did wrong, failure, that kind of thing.
Well, I think that's the kind of first important point that we need to start on that point, which is death in video games manifests in very, very different ways, and for different reasons and to different ends. In life, it is a constant. It's the great leveler everywhere. It comes to everybody, but as such, it is fundamental to the human experience and key to natural selection. You cannot improve a species without death. You have to have subsequent generations picking up different advantages over the last, but for there to be a next, there almost has to be death from, death within the last generation. And I think we're going to kind of loop back to that notion a little bit later. But, death features, it is core to human culture. Religious culture is almost entirely based on the notion of an afterlife, and how you behave in this life affects what happens to you afterwards. And entire religious faiths for thousands of years have been based on a lot to do with this. And there's no surprise that it's found its way prominently into literature too. Behind love, it is the second most prominent theme in literature. Which is nice, I guess.
Yeah.
I'm kind of somewhat glad that it hasn't taken the top spot.
I know.
But all of my writer friends from BioWare are gonna hate me for saying or pretending to know something about this. But
oh, dude, I think this topic, everybody like you said, it's in human nature to understand what it means. Because it happens to everything. Everything lives and dies, and as I think I'm surprised it's actually not number one in literature, because death, more than, I believe, in my opinion, more than love, makes you appreciate what you have, what is around you, because when you don't have it, that's when you miss it. So I feel like in games that kind of relates to that same idea. I think that's why it's something that just absolutely is understandable to everybody, that you've lost something and have a go at it again. It's kind of like Groundhog Day. It's like
right,
get it right or you're gonna keep dying.
Well, I think death being this, death not having the top spot, I like to think, and this is the optimist, I like to think it's because literature, poetry, it's still an escapist art form, and people want to escape into somewhere their imagination can take them that is better than life. And yes, death is prominent in real life. We're going to come back to this as well, but for a lot of people, love is what they aspire to, and to immerse yourself into a story with romantic elements is far more pleasurable than immersing yourself into a story that is all about death and loss.
Oh, no, yeah, but I think for a lot of writers out there, because I've dabbled in a little bit of writing myself, and usually writers are very they like to tug on the heartstrings, and
Oh yeah.
so
Well,
there's almost always, we kind of, death is that topic that is the moment to shine, because you could really get some very, very strong emotions from people if you do it, if you do it justice.
Relish the opportunity to write a brilliant death scene.
Absolutely,
and acting a brilliant death scene as well. For the performers as well as for the writers. It's it's one of the things that a certain type of actor would really look forward to. Chewing the scenery.
It sounds so grim, but it's true.
But it's about immersing people and affecting them emotionally. And
making them feel human.
Feel something. And if if as an actor you've kind of crafting a wonderful loved character to really revel in the death scene, that you're gonna pull people in. I mean, this is one of the literary one of the literary tools that's available to deepen immersion, is to make someone feel that this story is not scraping the surface anymore, and this story is kind of plunging the depths. It brings a real gravitas to what's going on, I think. George R.R. Martin knows this,
All too well.
And he will kill off well-loved and well-hated characters to immerse people further into what's going on. It's a point of balance too. It kind of, I don't know, it's a strange trade-off.
It really
to have
is.
a character die to legitimize a story. It's the Matrix, the Agent Smith line about measuring reality by pain and suffering, rather than everything that's happy. So maybe it's a necessary ingredient,
Oh, I think so. It's not just to legitimize, a story or a point or anything, but a character as well. I remember reading a book, and there was a character that I really loved, and there was the person had a horrible death, and not by gruesome or anything like that, but it was just written so bad. And it was like, this character doesn't deserve this kind of death. Not this character doesn't deserve to die. No, like, I'm okay with the character dying because it makes for really good literature, and I enjoy good literature. And I like feeling that kind of, as horrible as that sounds to say, but I want to feel when I'm reading or when I'm playing a game. And when you do justice to a loved character, even in a death scene, it makes you, it gives that character honors, and it honors that character in different ways that you could ever honor that character by keeping them alive. Killing them off is like, it's a weird feeling for me. I don't know how you feel about it, but when a character that I love dies in a game or in a book or in a movie, and they do it justice, it kind of just, it brings everything full circle, and you see how well written that character was, or how great that character was.
I think death goes a long way to immortalizing the actions of a person. And in fact, it might immortalize, especially if that person has creative outlets and creative expression. It means that their art doesn't die. And there are some real world cases where a well-loved personality has been taken too early. And that's the sentiment, that person will never be old, that person will never tarnish, that person will always be youthful and beautiful. And it immortalizes their contributions. And I'm thinking of James Dean, Heath Ledger, Jimi Hendrix, Jaco Pastorius. There are an awful lot of really beautifully creative people who contributed to culture in really meaningful ways that were taken early. And, they serve as inspiration to tens of millions. Is it because they died young? I don't know. I'm thinking it's a contributory factor.
Yeah, I think it's more about the life they lived what they had to give. That maybe that they were so known and so loved that when they're not there, it kind of becomes, like you said, immortalized in a very ironic and beautiful way. You know, death kind of gives them life even more so than, you know, it's a weird feeling.
Agreed. I mean, at this point, we need to say that this isn't a kind of meandering discourse that we are familiar with in our streams. This is to give our discussion some context. You know, we will loop back eventually to video games, I assure you.
Yeah, no, absolutely, especially because video games treats death in a very different way.
Well, quite, and you know, death in games can be as meaningful as all of this stuff. It very much depends on different elements creating a significance for different people in different ways. I don't say that to be evasive and non-committal, but the way that death is included in a video game's context is very, very important in defining its significance, and the player. And what the player looks for is very significant in terms of accepting how that death is, you know, supposed to find its, its narrative meaning or its gameplay meaning. It's something that you and I have spoken about pretty briefly before, but we've always had pretty fizzy ideas about the subject.
Oh yeah, it's a topic that I find very interesting. Not just when you experience, when it's used in a narrative and you experience it where one of the characters dies or something, but as the player.
I think something else that's worth saying, and it's been a big, it's been a point of understanding for me for years, has been the nature of play. And, for me, a big component of play is the notion that it's youth developing survival skills in a safe environment. And that is to prevent, is to ensure survival into adulthood so that then you can go and procreate. It is about shaping your physique, your mental understanding of the world such that it is a dangerous place. And, for infancy in every intelligent species, I'm pretty sure that everyone has seen footage of baby tigers, tiger cubs playing.
Yeah.
That's all very, very important development for that animal. Cats are the same, dogs are the same, and it's absolutely important for nurturing survival instincts and physical strength.
Yeah.
But then after that instinctive learning, there's cultural learning. And, for kids that grow up now, there is stuff like hide and seek, physical games that are very quickly taught, very easily understood, and very important for that kind of fight or flight instinct and developing that kind of thing. But also, culturally, death has a very important part to play culturally. Whether a kid grows up in a religious household or not, death finds its way into children's literature anyway. I don't think I'll ever forget watching Watership Down when I was younger and feeling the impact of death as it's written into that experience. It's very, very important, very impactful.
Oh, yeah.
Even now, characters get lost in the big franchises, and that's very impactful for kids growing up and understanding notions of loss.
Yeah.
So it's there to, it's there in entertainment forms to kind of shape understanding and make sure that people have, I guess, respect for it.
So I have, to get us into the topic of death in video games, I have a little story to share about probably one of the worst experiences I had with death in a narrative in games.
Oh God. Okay.
It was in Dragon Age Origins. And this was really it was a feeling that I had never felt before. There have been deaths before in video games that have made me cry, or that have made me feel really sad. But in Dragon Age Origins, this is an old enough game for me not to worry too much about spoilers. But one of the characters that I absolutely loved and that I was romancing, Alistair, he was always in my party. Always. He was my sword and shield. He was my tank, so I always had him in my party. And I absolutely adored the character. The last mission of the game, you go up against the archdemon, and you get to choose your party. I take Alistair, without even thinking, and the other people that I was going to take. But I didn't think, narratively, that Alistair was a Grey Warden, and I was a Grey Warden. We were in a relationship. It was going to come down to either one of us killing the archdemon, because only a Grey Warden can kill an archdemon. I never stopped to think that Alistair could die if I took him in the party. I was like, I never thought, okay, I'm not going to take Alistair because he's going to die if I take him. I didn't think about it. I just took him. It comes down to the moment where we have to kill the archdemon, and I have the option of saying, I'm going to kill him. But with killing the archdemon, the Grey Warden dies as well. So I was like, I'm going to kill myself. I'm going to kill the archdemon. I don't want Alistair to die. But it never crossed my mind that we were in a relationship and he would never let me do it. So he's like, nope, I'm going to do it. And I was like, oh my God, I screwed this up. Why did I bring Alistair? He's not going to let me do it. This was my plan from the beginning. I was like, I'm going to go down killing the archdemon. But Alistair didn't let me. And he goes, kills the archdemon, dies. And I felt horrible. I felt so bad. I felt so guilty. I was like, oh my God, I ruined it. I ruined it. Why did I take him? Why did I take him? Because if you don't take Alistair, he doesn't die. You kill the archdemon. So Alistair dies in my game, and in the whole epilogue, it's all dying down and everybody's talking to each other. And I am just this, and I don't mean my character, but me as a player was in shock. I was like, I didn't know what to do anymore. I was like, what do I do? Do I redo this? Do I restart? And I wasn't even paying attention to anything anybody was telling me in the game anymore. They were, Liliana was telling me if I wanted to go with her, and I just said no, and I just didn't want anything anymore. And the game ends, and these beautiful credits start. For those of you that haven't seen the credits of Dragon Age Origins, I would recommend you see it because they're gorgeous. It's like this parchment paper with these drawings that start appearing. And the music, oh my God. The music it's called I Am the One, I believe. And it's just this beautiful song with these visuals. And immediately that song starts and I start bawling. I just start crying like I've never cried before in a game. And I was like, what is going on with me? I didn't understand what was going on. I didn't understand why I was so emotional, why I felt so guilty. Honestly, this was actually somebody that I knew in real life that I put to their death. And in that moment, I was like, there's no way I'm going to restart this. There's no way I'm going to go back and redo that because of the emotion that I'm getting now. It was so real. It was so shocking to me that I just couldn't. I couldn't restart it, even if it meant that I wouldn't take Alistair and he wouldn't die in my game. It was so amazing to me that this game had done that to me with a decision that I had made. and that I wasn't going to go back on because it was so real. That was probably the most amazing death that I had ever experienced in a game because of how it felt. It made me feel something that I never thought a game would make me feel.
Not wanting to go back to restart the chapter or go back to the save point before, do you feel that maybe it was because you had invested so much and it had taken an emotional toil that you didn't want to kind of diminish the gravitas by saying, it's just a video game death, I'll go back and do it right?
Yeah, I didn't want to pretend like that hadn't happened, that I hadn't gotten that raw emotion. I think if I hadn't broken down the way that I did at the end, I think I probably would have gone back to do it. But the way that I broke down, I was like, this is not, I can't pretend like this isn't happening to me. And I appreciated that feeling so much, even though it was tearing me up. I appreciated that it was done like that, that I was so invested in this game and these characters, and that they did it so well, and that tied with the music and everything, the whole journey. I was like, this is how my game was meant to end. And I went through it was weird because when I went and played the DLC that came out for Dragon Age Origins that takes place after what happened in DAO, I knew that Alistair was already dead, and I felt like my Grey Warden was really sad. It was a really weird feeling. It was so immersive. I felt like I knew what my Grey Warden was feeling because I had felt it. And every decision that I made afterwards in that DLC was based off of those emotions, because it was like my Grey Warden just became this shell, she became cold. And it was because of what had happened, because she felt so much guilt, because I was like, I know what that feels like, because strangely I felt it. So it changed my character completely. I used to play my Grey Warden in a specific way, and then after that, she just became a different character. And I found that, it'll forever be one of the most amazing experiences for me. That game will always be so special to me because of how it changed the way that I saw my character because of what happened.
I guess it's fortunate that you can't see what is coming narratively, so there's every chance that if you were playing a game in the future, it could conceivably do the same thing to you.
Oh yeah, and I look forward to it. I sound like a masochist, but I look forward. I've always said, that's the bar for me. I've cried in on camera with Mass Effect 3 and The Walking Dead and The Witcher, but I never felt what I did in DAO, and that's the bar. I'm waiting for the game to come back, for a different game to come back and make me feel like that.
So nothing before or after has come close?
No.
So honestly, do you expect it to?
I don't think so.
Or do you expect something to?
I hope so, but I don't think so. Because it was also... It's so many things tied to that moment. A lot of things, guilt, the sadness, the closeness that I had with that character, narratively, what that character meant to my character, how great the character was written. It was just so many things that came down to make that situation what it was, that I don't think it could be recreated. And if it's not, then that's fine. But I would love to experience something that real from a game again.
It's strange. We've spoken a lot in the past about, on other podcasts, about the notion of using video games as a benchmark to measure your own development and your growth next to. And, when we were talking about it earlier, or before rather, when we were talking about it before, it was, skills and the kind of mechanical improvements. That was the only thing that was kind of going through my mind then.
Right.
Emotional development is just as significant and, that much more, arguably, that much more immersive for certain people. Do you think maybe, DAO was what, 2009, 2010?
2010, I believe.
Right. Do you think in the last 8 years you've hardened a little bit? Do you think maybe a game that was just as well written and played out just as, in a similar way would give you the same kind of feeling?
No, I don't think I've hardened more. Where it's like I wouldn't have that kind of reaction, anyways. Even if it all came down to the same idea and feeling, I know that I would break down. I'm such a I'm such a crybaby when it comes to things like that. But no, I haven't felt what I felt in that moment because I haven't experienced anything that real anymore. I mean, there was a moment. I think the closest that it's come was another BioWare game, because BioWare games just love to tug on our heartstrings. But it was in Mass Effect 3 with Legion. And this was really weird to me because Legion is a robot. He's a Geth. And he's supposed to be, technically he's supposed to be a bad guy. People see him as a bad guy, the Geth. But Legion was just such a cool character, written so well, that when he, quote unquote, died, he just shuts down. But in my mind, it was like Legion's died. And this is on video. But you could see that I just, that moment where you don't, it's not like like a little tear starts falling from my eye. No, I get choked up. I stop. And I'm like, what's going on? I didn't get it. I was like, there's no way. So that was very close, but definitely nowhere near the emotion that I felt, because like I said, there was so many emotions that I was feeling at the same time because of the music, because of the guilt. I think was what was making me feel like I didn't. It was weird because I was like, this sucks. Like, I don't like this anymore. Like, I don't want to do this. It was this weird feeling where I just didn't care anymore. But then, the credits start and I'm like, oh my God, that was beautiful that I felt that. So I don't think any other game is going to get things that in that way, in that order, to make me feel that way. But maybe I hopefully I'll be able to feel very similarly or that same way for different reasons.
Was that your first playthrough?
Yes, it was.
And have you done more?
No.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
So you kind of want to protect the significance of the game with that one experience? I
kind of do. I mean, Origins is a beautiful game, and after so many years, I would go back and play it. But a lot of people have said, "What's your perfect game save or something like that? What's your perfect?" What would, like, people will go back and play it trying to get the perfect warden, what they believe is perfect. And I was like, you know what? That was my perfect. It was the first one that I did. There were no others to put it up against. But how real it was, it's like, even if I lost Alistair, to some people it's like, well, that's not your perfect save because you lost the character. But it was perfect to me.
So after staring into your soul for the last 15 minutes, hearing about hearing the sensitive retelling of a very clearly emotionally significant moment in games because of death, or because of the theme of death or the impact of a death, we'll kind of move the discussion on to something which I'm certainly very interested in examining a little bit with you, and that's death as a fail condition in gameplay, because and I think it's important, I think, at this point to kind of mark the distinction between death as a narrative beat and death as a way that you can become annoyed in a video game, a way that you can learn how to master a video game, a way that you go from novice to virtuoso in a video game. And, getting back to that theme of natural selection, if you think of every life as a generation, every generation goes a little bit further in a little bit of a different direction, and then it dies, and then you start again, learning from the past, and then you eventually get better and better and better. Plus, I think separating, defining the death as a fail condition means that we can examine games where you fail, you experience a fail condition, but almost subconsciously you don't identify it as a death. I think to start the discussion off, I kind of want to talk about the games where death is so expected that you don't have continues, you don't have a number of lives. Death is integral to the design of the video game, that it's not only expected, but in certain cases it's celebrated.
Yeah.
So on that note, I want to start with Celeste.
Yes.
Which is a game that we've both played. Yeah. And it's in the same vein as Super Meat Boy. It's one of the, I don't even know how to classify it. To call it a pixel art platformer, I think would diminish it, because it's it's a game of a beautiful little construct where
it is.
You try and fail, you try and fail, you try and you fail, and then you try and you succeed, and it's wonderful, but the game keeps track of how many times you failed, and it says, do you know what? Don't even worry about it. We are keeping numbers, but race your mates to 1,000 deaths. This ridiculous.
Only makes you cooler. Like, it's no longer fails, how many times you failed, but how long it's taken you to master it.
Yeah, quite right. I mean, you've played, in fact, you were my gateway into Celeste because you got a copy first. So, what's your experience of that kind of game?
It was, I tend to lose interest in those types of games a lot faster, I think, because when I got Celeste, I had heard so many good things about it, and I was like, you know what, I'm gonna get it. And when I started playing it, I was like, oh gosh, it's one of these games, where you die, and that's basically how you learn. But there's something beautiful about the way that the music, the way that it's made, the character, and the little, even if it's just a little tiny story that's woven in there, it's so adorable to me that I'm like, you know what? I really like this little girl, Celeste. I love the idea that she has to get to the top of this mountain. And I was like, I never thought, rage quit, screw this. I kept playing. I kept doing it. And when you nail some of those puzzles,
it's brilliant.
It's like,
it's so satisfying.
Yeah, you feel like you're the best person ever. You're like, I bet nobody has nailed it as good as I just did. You feel like you're on top of the world for a second.
I mean, that's one of the important parts of immersion that I'm a big champion of. It's empowering the player with, a certain set of tools or skills within the framework in the game. And it's the feeling that the player is using them in a unique combination, that they are doing it and they are succeeding their own way.
Yep.
When you get games like Gran Turismo, where the fail condition is sliding off the track and losing a quarter of a second and crossing the finish line in a time that is not appropriate, you don't get the same immersion. But when you when you practice and practice and practice on a game where the way you do it isn't quite so exacting, it's a real buzz,
Oh yeah.
I mean, and then there are two, to talk about video game successes for a moment. Especially Gran Turismo, I think, is a great example of perfecting something that where there are only one or two ways to do something properly. It's like playing a piece of music that somebody else has written. You become a performer of that piece, and there is only one way to play it well. Granted, you can involve your own kind of expression. You can slow it down, you can speed it up, you can quieten it down, you can louden it whenever you like to communicate an emotional resonance. But there are very limited ways to make you feel that there is, flair that you can impart on the experience from your perspective as either a player or a musician. With something like Celeste, there were definitely occasions when I was playing it where I felt, holy crap, I lucked out when I was, I was trying something and I found a very lucky solution to a puzzle that I would, I had never planned for and could never hope to achieve. But they all count, and it was like, yeah, holy cow, am I going to go back and do it again properly? Hell no.
Yeah.
Going to carry on.
Yeah.
But when you do experiment and you do work out the way and you do find the way, it's one of the most rewarding experiences in video games, I think.
Oh yeah.
That you found out the way that you've done. And the notion of a secret room, moving away from that kind of game briefly to go to the Marios and the Sonics, to find a big secret room, it's like, for a brief moment, you think, yeah, no one else has discovered
Yeah,
this.
exactly. You're like, I'm Indiana Jones.
This is mine.
So
this
cool.
Is my
Yeah.
But again, to go back to the fail conditions are, they're a part of the game design as authored by the designers in charge. But when you start setting yourself targets, that you're the one, you're playing against the game, you are responsible for success and for failure. Whether that involves the character's death, whether that involves the in Celeste again, whether that means you miss a platform and you fall off the screen and you explode into a little rainbowy glitter ball and you get reset, it doesn't really matter. Failure as a player is still failure. And there's all of this thing about diminishing the significance of death so that people kind of treat it with a trivial notion. I don't buy that for a second. In the video game context, when you recognize that there's a task to be done as a player rather than a life to live as a character, there's a stark distinction there.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
But then you had a point about checkpoints in video games or save points.
Checkpoints are really interesting to me. Like in Ghouls and Ghosts, that game is. We both know. I think everybody knows, but both of us have.
Bang.
Yep. have history with this game, and and we've grown to appreciate it. But when we go back to play it, it's like, okay, yeah, this is why I've never beat this game. It's just so difficult. And basically, you've got one goal. It's so hard that you're not even thinking about beating the game. You're not even thinking about beating the level. You're like, I need to find this freaking checkpoint because I am not going to start from the beginning again for the 20th time.
But I think this introduces another interesting discussion point about death in video games or deaths in video games, and that was the move from the arcade to the home. I know we've discussed this a little bit before we started recording, but when you went to the arcade and you paid 25 cents for 3 lives or 1 continue or however long it lasted,
right,
you were absolutely okay with death being a part of the video game, because 25 cents, if you got a video game in that kind of era right, you were only playing it for 25 or 30 minutes.
Right.
Ikaruga. I cite Ikaruga as one of the perfect arcade experiences because it's hard as nails. If you get it right, one go of it lasts 35 minutes, and it will take me, the old man, thousands of hours to practice and die enough that I've learned sufficiently. But the problem is, like, I have to go back. You know, if I was to get to 32 minutes in and die, I've got to do all of that work.
To do all over,
again.
yep.
Yeah. You know, roguelikes are making a bit of a splash at the moment. Dead Cells is a brilliant roguelike. Rogue Legacy.
Right, you were telling me about that one. I haven't gotten that one yet, but I find it intriguing.
Man, like, I mean, you know, as is with a roguelike, there's an element of procedural generation of levels. So it's a little bit different every time. But, you know, you could play a round for an hour and a half and then die, and then you go back. And fortunately, death in that kind of video game depends on your power-ups and your perks. You know, you can send, and this is the natural selection thing again, you can send either money that you've collected or weapon schematics into the next life that you start, so that all of those perks and benefits are available to your next playthrough when you start again. But that you can only get that after you've died. And, you know, when you die in that game in possession of those kind of schematics, your next life starts better, and then you are a more evolved character, and you can go further and higher and faster and longer. So, you know, it's philosophically speaking, it's a really interesting discussion point. I think that, you know, I'm going to scratch the most superficial of surfaces talking about it right now, but I think it's brilliant.
Oh yeah, and when they use death like that, when it's not just, you know, turn into a little rainbow colors and then restart, get this little cute death jingle, you know, that I have on my phone of Kirby dying.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Or, you know, Mario doing that funny little hands out, legs out thing and the crazy eyes.
And the piano.
Yeah.
Yeah. Another point that I was going to get to with the arcade game and going to the arcade and stuff, the introduction of really sophisticated home games, it introduced, I think, a different way of structuring games, because you can't have the same kind of difficulty. You make people pay. You know, you get to the arcade, you don't get to choose easy, normal, or hard, right? It's always the most difficult thing, because you're going to get $40 out of someone in quarters, right?
Yeah.
If they do it right. Yeah. If you get the home version, it's $40, and you can't give them that kind of hard difficulty out of the box, because it's just too frustrating.
Right.
And the opportunity to learn is not that great. You've got to kind of ramp up. You know, the difficulty curve has got to be sufficiently loose that you can not only get better but enjoy getting better. So, you know, looking back, I wouldn't be surprised if there was a decent tight correlation between the difficulty of games and the move into the home.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And
I would be fascinated to see the correlation between sophisticated home titles and, you know, against their arcade counterparts.
Right.
I mean, with games like, dare I say the words, Detroit Become Human, Heavy Rain.
You actually called it a game? Good job.
Yeah. When you get experiences like that, it is just about getting to the end, and it's about ticking the narrative boxes. Whether it immerses you to the same degree, I'll never know, because speaking candidly, it's just not the type of game that I relish playing. And you know, listening with jealousy to your story about DAO, I don't think I'm going to have an experience, a narrative or emotional experience in a video game quite that rich, because you know, it sounded like you struck gold with your playthrough.
Oh yeah, no, I think so too. But just when you mentioned Heavy Rain, I think it's important to mention about Heavy Rain. Out of the Quantic Dream games, Heavy Rain, I think, was done the best, because Heavy Rain had what's called permadeath in video games, like Fire Emblem as well, where you have characters, you play a group of characters, you don't play just one. And if you do things wrong, you die, like in any other game, but they're gone forever. It's like you can't play that character anymore. You screwed it up, they're dead. And that was, when you play a game with permadeath, it's a completely new experience. It becomes so intense because you're like, I actually really like this character, and if they're gone and they die like for good, that's not gonna be cool.
So to continue the gamey chat into our final section, I think it's definitely something worth discussing and exploring, is the notion of saving. I know we've talked, I kind of derailed our discussion a little bit some minutes ago, and I dared to speak about video game successes briefly, but I think the notion of saves, again, you only get it in home titles, and you only get it in some of them. But the notion of saving your successes or saving your progress, I think it kind of parallels how you balance how often death happens to your character, or how often you need to be careful of dying and losing progress.
Yeah. How often you save your character,
or how often you're allowed to. Yep.
Which is a really interesting. I was saying I hadn't actually thought about the word, the actual, the choice of word. Like, when did this happen? Like, when was it actually called a save? Why is it called a save? It's like saving a life, death versus saving.
So it's the semantics of the term. You can kind of read into the word.
Yeah, what it means. And like you said, when games came into the home in the 80s, not including computers, of course, when consoles came into the home. Before that, the majority of gaming was in arcades, like you said, and games weren't long enough to even think of a save. It was always just, quick. It wasn't too personal because there was usually more people in the arcade. You had to think, about the person behind you. There's a huge line. You got to move on. But once it came into the consoles, into the home, the first game to include the save system was The Legend of Zelda, the gold cartridge, because it was long. Yeah. And it actually had the capability of saving your progress. So once games like that kicked off, that was a whole new concept, because it was like, okay, is it fair to make it that, some games do that, but is it fair to make this huge game like Zelda without a save and just go and every time you die, all your progress, you have to start all over? I think people wouldn't really find that entertaining. They just find that really annoying.
I agree. But I think there are, firstly, when you say that Zelda was a comparatively long game, how long is a Zelda playthrough?
Oh, God, depending on the game.
That one, the gold cartridge.
The gold cartridge, I don't know how long the gameplay was for that game, but Legend of Zelda games can go past 40 hours.
Right. It's a stark contrast to the stuff that you were getting at the time, like, Mario Brothers.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Mario Golf. You were getting a whole raft of NES experiences that were very quick. You just played it to get your hit, and at home you didn't have to put a quarter in, so it was very convenient. But something that I kind of wanted to say was there are games where there's an implicit understanding, or maybe an explicit understanding, I don't know, but there is an ingrained understanding where you don't even look for a save system. You don't even look to be able to save. I'm talking about games like Streets of Rage 2, the side-scrolling beat-em-up. Even the side-scrolling platformer. Racing games, certainly. There is a point where and this is a kind of interesting crossover with something like Not a Hero, is that when you get a good racing game and you get into the difficult tracks or the difficult stages, you know pretty early whether you're going to screw up or whether you're going to actually make it across the finishing line in time and beat the opponent. You know, I'm thinking specifically of Gran Turismo. You know pretty early in a high pressure race whether you're going to score, you know, whether you're going to get a podium or not, whether you're going to win or not. And it's almost like, do you know what? Screw it. I have messed that one corner up. I have messed that one corner up where I needed to get a good exit speed. I needed to steer right into it and not lose, you know, carry all of that speed through, and I screwed it up. So I know, even at the first turn, that I'm going to fail this. Pause, restart, and then you restart, right? Trackmania is an even closer Trackmania is an even closer comparison to Not a Hero, because Trackmania also has a reset to start button, because it knows that you've got to, you know, you're racing against your ghost, and you've got to get every turn perfectly right. You've got to get it, you know, you've got to shave the corner with your tyre so that you get the most economical line through it, you carry most speed through, and, you know, in order to get the best time. You mentioned checkpoints earlier. Outrun was a game all about checkpoints. You don't get 20 seconds away from a checkpoint and think, oh, I better save.
Right. It's just, you know.
You know you're either going to make it or you're not. And if you're not sure, that's brilliant. That's perfect, because then that, you know, the excruciating pain of missing out on a checkpoint by 0.05 of a second, it's perfect, because then you start and you said, right, I only missed it by 0.05 of a second. I'm going to get it the next time.
See, I hate when that happens. It's like, I saw it. It was right there.
But that's the exact kind of fuel that you need to, to make a racing game sticky. You know, that it's great. But to compare it back to Not a Hero, you know, I've mentioned it in podcasts before, but Not a Hero has a reset button on the, you know, it's got restart level mapped to a button on the pad, so you don't have to go through the pause menu. It's just like, screwed that up within the first 3 seconds, back to the beginning, do it again. Right. And it's a kind of hybrid of that natural selection type gameplay from Super Meat Boy and Celeste, and the kind of, you know, side-scrolling pixel art joy that is Cave Story or Axiom Verge. You know, it's kind of at a hybrid between the two. And plus, you've got racing game style objectives. You've got to get to checkpoints in certain times. You know, it is it's a timed checkpoint, but they say, oh, you've got to go and meet the press within 20 seconds, or you've got to save Ruby within a minute. Yeah. It's just a checkpoint. You know, you've got to get through the level to this point in a certain time, or you will lose that objective. And it's the most wonderful panic. You know? I genuinely think it's brilliant, but it's absolutely understood that you can't and shouldn't need to and shouldn't even want to save in those games. Streets of Rage 2, one of my absolute favorites. I've never ever missed the ability to save progress in that game, you know. I get what you mean. In some of them, you just don't think about it. No, I mean, the idea is to protect your lives. Yeah. But with pure skill. Right. You know, if saving strategy plays into the skill, it's a very, very different experience. To bore you with more of my game experiences to do with this, Half-Life 1, one of the defining contributions, one of the defining aspects of that game was surviving through one period of combat with 3 or 4 health, and then saving straight away, thinking, oh god, I'm glad I've got through that bit, only to find that there's more marines or more head crabs or more hound eyes round a corner that I've got to now avoid, you know.
And every time you restart, it's like you're gonna be on 4 health or 2 health.
And that's a weird thing to be like. The hardcore Half-Life fans who are listening to this will remember a level in the original game called Unforeseen Consequences. No, it wasn't Unforeseen Consequences. It was Questionable Ethics. And the beginning of Questionable Ethics was you crawl up a tunnel straight into an area of a room or an area of a building where there are hound eyes that are being kept in the kind of quarantine dog cages. And as soon as you pop the hatch out of the tunnel, they all swarm around you and they start charging up their pulse attacks. and you hear that noise of the dogs charging the attack up. And if you've saved at the end of the previous level with 2 health, you know you're going to get annihilated and there's nothing you can do about it.
Yeah.
So you're just going back to the save point. You're going back and you just, it's luck at that point.
Yeah.
And that's a really weird position to be in when your survival base is based on trial and error and bald-faced luck.
But it's also I think the developer giving you it reminds me of like a genie in a lamp, like be careful what you wish for. It's like, yeah, sure, here's 3 wishes. Wish whatever you want. They're giving you the ability to save. You can save whenever you want. But it's like, you better be smart about it. Don't just save right after you. It's like, oh my God, I didn't die and now I could, you got to be smart about it, because I remember saving in places where I was stuck, and every time I'd restart, I'd be stuck. And I was like, oh my God, you got to be kidding me.
I can beat you. So another game that I absolutely adore from the same period, 1998 it came out, Unreal 1, the single player adventure. Mm-hmm. And also, the first first-person shooter to feature bot match and challenge. Anyway, there was quick save and quick load bound to the function keys on Unreal. Mm-hmm. But the game, when you loaded, you'd have the start menu and you would have a flyby through a castle at the beginning of the game, which was in-engine. But it was so in-engine that if you accidentally pressed quick save instead of quick load, you would save the flyby.
Oh, no.
And you would overwrite your progress in the game. So you would only have one quick save file that was always updated. Now, if you had something like Norton installed, right, you would get like a Norton protected wastebasket, and that would save, that would keep the save game that the process deleted. So if you were very lucky, you could restore that save, but otherwise you were screwed, because that would overwrite all of your progress. I mean, I've unnervingly brushed up against another death in video games topic, which is the Quake 3 Arena Unreal Tournament type, the way that they the way they portray death. Mm-hmm. And that's written into the premise, Mm-hmm. They store your pattern. If you get killed, they resynthesize another copy of you, and then you go on and do your stuff.
Oh, the clone system.
Cool. It's the clone premise.
Right, yeah. Right.
And it's almost like Star Trek's transporters. They store your pattern and beam you in whenever you die. Similar also to, there was a Christopher Nolan movie about magic called The Prestige.
Oh, The Prestige, yeah.
Yeah, and Nikola Tesla helps, I think it was Hugh Jackman's character, make this disappearing tank teleporter thing, not knowing that for every time he teleported, he was making a copy of himself that was dying in those tanks. So, it's a brilliant movie. I'll watch it again because, in Nolan we trust.
So bringing it back full circle, like we said we would in the beginning, death in video games is an interesting mechanic used to make us appreciate what we're doing, to make us angry, to make us frustrated, to stop our achieving something, to reach a point where we want to go, interrupting our playthrough. To make us feel in ways that we never thought games could, and to help us learn, to help us feel like we're on top of the world. It's a mechanic that is extremely, extremely interesting, and that it is not only the way of making us see that we've failed, but also a mechanic in the gameplay. Like any other skill that you have available to you. Death is always one of those mechanics in games that help us realize what we're doing.
helps us realize that what we're doing matters as well.
Yeah,
you know?
absolutely. Yeah.
If there's no jeopardy, there's little point.
Oh, yeah, that's the thing. Consequence and jeopardy, that's a huge thing for me.
If there's no sense that what you're doing is easy, or if there is a sense that what you're doing is easy, what's the point? You know, you need challenge, and the fear of something to take your success or your progress away is very important.
Yeah, like,
You know, we spoke a lot about literature and poetry and other art forms at the beginning of the session, and it stitches its way through human culture. I don't think it's endemic to any one particular demographic or group. It's everywhere, and you know.
Yeah, it keeps us going, because, you know, you're alive and you keep going until death halts you. So, of course, you're going to have a reason to keep going, to keep learning, to know that you're doing something right.
Yeah, you got to go and get it.
Yep.
So that's pretty much it. Be sure to check the description for all the lovely ways to...
I do the outro. This is the GamerMD83 podcast, and I'm GamerMD83.
Well, I'll be over here if you need me.
Yeah. So that's pretty much it. Be sure to check the description for all the ways to keep in touch. Stuff like YouTube, Twitter, Twitch, and Patreon. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll talk to you guys later.